Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome so much. I'm so sorry for those of you who are having a little challenges logging on. Please do try again. What I will try to do in a moment is resend all the links to the entire group of persons who have registered. First of all, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Avril Balfon, and I am I'm wearing two hats here. I'm the government archivist of the National Archives of Trinidad and Tobago. But today I'm here as the president of CARBICA, which is the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives. And we're so pleased to welcome you to this first webinar that we're having to highlight the I'm calling it the first aid for cultural heritage, which was designed and conceptualized through ICCROM, and we are being sponsored, of course, by them. Let me just say that this work has been conceived within the framework of ICCROM's flagship program on first aid and resilience for cultural heritage in times of crisis, and its capacity building project on culture cannot wait, heritage for peace and resilience, supported by the Swedish Postcode Foundation. And today we are going to be joined by two panelists, which would be Ms. Halcyon Wilshire Busby and Mr. Samuel Franco, both of whom have benefited from this training and are now alumni of the of that training and are now resource persons on our behalf. Just to give a little background, the Caribbean branch of the International Council on Archives initially got involved, let me put it this way. Following the devastating hurricanes which occurred in 2017 in our region, we as a small regional organization, of course, with our concern for archival heritage, reached out to our colleagues and sought ways that we could do something to mitigate, to assist, to support in whatever way. And we realized, not that we didn't know all along, of course, that we were so much at risk and how vulnerable we are as small island states and in a region plagued by hurricanes and earthquakes and flooding, etc. But we felt there needed to be something done. And we meaning CARBICA, had a project under the International Council on Archives called Archives at Risk. And we approached them to convert that project into some support for our colleagues who are facing this difficult moment. And coming out of that, and in the following year, we met together, and there was a groundswell of support from regional heritage professionals, not just archivists, librarians, archaeologists, people involved in built and natural heritage, tangible and intangible heritage, all came together in St. Martin, and a resolution was passed. We needed to do something to support ourselves as a region, to be prepared to mitigate and to respond in case of disaster. Now you're going to hear a whole lot more about this network, which came out of that discussion, which is the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network. But just to say, this is really our first step in terms of doing our part to see if we could build that capacity in the region to prepare, mitigate, and respond to disasters in our area. And today, I'm just going to start by introducing our two speakers very briefly, because I know listening to these long sessions, especially on Zoom, it can be a little tedious. We had hoped that we would have been able to do some breakout sessions and possibly some exercises with you today. But I have to say, I mean, and this is not a negative thing, we've had such an overwhelming response in terms of attendees and participants that the feasibility of it may not happen, but we'll see how we go. Most likely we'll proceed with having the presentations from the speakers, and then we'll do questions and answers. We're going to try to do questions and answers from after each speaker, so that you'll have sort of like a break between the two, and then we'll discuss some of the exercises and the ways we're going to proceed going forward. I think at the end, I will come back to say how we will proceed in terms of the next 4 seminars. Halcyon and Samuel, I believe that that may be better. Let's give them a little taste of what it is, and then we'll go into some details of what those later seminars would involve, and then we'll give you some guidelines about how you can sign on for the full program or whichever part you're interested in, and so on. So without further ado, we have here with us, we're going to begin with Halcyon Wilshire Busby, who is currently the archive assistant at the West Indian Federal Archive Center in Barbados. She's a member of both CABICA and CABICA Chen on the steering committee of that group, and has, as I said, she's an alumni of the training that was offered by ICCROM, I apologize, on FACT. As Caribbean people, we have all had the experience of and the challenges of disasters and having to deal with that. So that experience, I think, is taken for granted from both our presenters, the actual live experience, in addition to which, as part of this steering committee and responsibility for her own archives, we have had to develop, and she has had to develop plans and for preparing for responding to disasters. So this is Halcyon. And then Samuel Franco from Guatemala, in charge of the Emergency Center in Guatemala, also an alumni of the FACT training, has done this training several times with many persons, and in our region also, as I mentioned, St. Martin, he was there for some live on-site training for regional participants, and has himself been live and direct in some responding to disasters, as well as I said, sharing this training with persons going forward. And I would like to open the floor now to them. I believe we will begin with Halcyon, who will give us an, as you saw in our program, introduction to cultural heritage in times of the FACT concepts, introduction to cultural heritage in times of crisis, at a glance, insights into tangible and intangible heritage, and then we'll be followed by Samuel talking about being prepared, identifying risks to cultural heritage, examining coordinated risk assessment approaches. And we want this to be a valuable and useful time for you and a good learning experience. It is a beginning, as I say, a start, as we see who's on today, who's involved today, and we will then go a little further in our discussions later about how we will proceed for the other sessions. So I introduce and open the floor to Halcyon. Thank you all so very much.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. So as Rose said, I'm Halcyon Wilshire Busby, Assistant Archivist at the West Indies Federal Archive Center at the Cape Hill campus on Native of Trinidad and Tobago. But having lived in Barbados for over 10 years, I consider myself a Caribbean person. So what we're going to discuss today is food safety cultural heritage in times of crisis, PAC and at a glance, looking at tangible heritage and intangible heritage. So what is cultural heritage? UNESCO defines cultural heritage as being part of our legacy from the past, what we live with today and what we pass on to future generations. So it could be natural heritage or both irreplaceable and sources of life and inspiration. So what's depicted here is just a snapshot of Harrison's Cave in Barbados, a cave located in the parish of St. Thomas, and one that is a tourist attraction, but also considered a natural wonder. And we have to try to maintain its authenticity as much as possible. So cultural heritage continues. So ICCROM defines cultural heritage, or the International Council on Monuments and Sites, cultural heritage is considered a non-renewable resource of knowledge, identity, history, and expression of both ways of living, developed both by a community and passed on from generation to generation, which is inclusive of customs, places, objects, artistic expressions, and values. Cultural heritage is often expressed as either intangible or tangible cultural heritage. So depicted here is in this culture park in Grenada. And it's also part of it's a modern day thing, but it's also part of the natural ecosystem in terms of the regeneration of coral within our seas. So it's an amalgamation of the use of art in maintaining our natural resource in the region. Sorry. So after being part of the FAC program, being immersed in FAC, I'm here to introduce you to FAC. It's the immediate and interdependent actions taken to stabilize and reduce risk to endangered cultural heritage during and after an emergency, and collectively defined as cultural heritage first aid. The immediate cause of an emergency may be natural or man-made hazard, or a combination of both. First aid includes the analysis of an emergency situation, on-site damage and risk assessment, and security and stabilization. So why do we say natural hazards, or rather rather than natural disasters? This is something that through the FACT course, it's no longer part of my vernacular to say natural disasters, because something that's intimated to us is that there's nothing such as a natural disaster, that disasters that happen within all confines happen as a result of human actions. So I'm going to show a short video highlighting what FAC is really about. So please look.
When disaster strikes, years of human achievement can be wiped out in a moment. In a large-scale disaster, such as an earthquake or an armed conflict, people are often anxious to salvage their ancient monuments, their works of art, or their family heirlooms, sometimes putting their own lives at risk. First aid to cultural heritage ensures the effects of a disaster on heritage can be tackled in a systematic and practical way, helping people resume their lives and move towards recovery.
Hi, Halcyon.
Yes, please.
First aid to cultural
Sorry,
heritage.
we're not seeing your screen.
3 steps.
Can you pause the video, please?
Can I? Sorry.
We're not seeing your screen yet.
Oh. Okay.
Step 1.
In Barbados, cultural heritage sites, and one that is also a tourist attraction. And in the definition of ICCROM, it looked at cultural heritage and looking at it from knowledge, identity, history, and values expressed, either tangible or intangible. So when I spoke to the sculpture park in Grenada, this is a sculpture park that's also supposed to be used as a mode of regenerating corals within the reefs, and it's also a heritage site, or considered a heritage site. So, as previously mentioned, in terms of first aid to culture. So first aid to culture, as previously mentioned, is the immediate and interdependent actions taken to stabilize and reduce risk to endangered cultural heritage during and after an emergency. Is collectively defined as cultural heritage first aid. So the immediate cause of such an emergency may be natural or a man-made hazard. So as I previously mentioned, one thing that we're trying to get out of our vernacular is to call certain acts of disaster a natural disaster. Because with human intervention, a disaster is no longer considered. It's not considered a natural disaster. So first aid includes the analysis of an emergency situation and on-site damage to risk, and also involving risk assessment and security stabilization. So what I have here is a video that I'd like to show on first aid to culture.
When disaster strikes, years of human achievement can be wiped out in a moment. In a large-scale disaster, such as an earthquake or an armed conflict, people are often anxious to salvage their ancient monuments, their works of art, or their family heirlooms, sometimes putting their own lives at risk. First aid to cultural heritage ensures the effects of a disaster on heritage can be tackled in a systematic and practical way, helping people resume their lives and move towards recovery. First aid to cultural heritage consists of three steps. Step one is a situation analysis, examining the wider context and looking at what heritage people want to save while identifying who is in charge and who takes action. Will it be the army? Are firefighters required? Will volunteers be available? Step two is a damage and risk assessment, determining the extent of any damage to cultural heritage, assessing buildings and affected items, and identifying exposed or unstable objects that may pose a risk if left unattended. Step three is the security and stabilization phase, in which action is taken to contain damage and stabilize the condition of affected heritage. This might involve evacuating items, shoring unstable structures, providing temporary storage for materials, and ensuring traditions and rituals can be resumed safely. A cultural first aider can be anyone trained in emergency response who is people focused and action oriented. The cultural first aid method will help improve emergency preparedness, enabling people and organizations to protect cultural heritage in conjunction with humanitarian assistance and train others to do the same. Find out more about first aid to cultural heritage in a handbook designed to empower quick and effective emergency response action. Download
So
it
that
for free at www.icrom.org. By rescuing cultural heritage, together we can help communities and build resilience. Training for Cultural Heritage First Aid is a joint initiative between ICCROM, the International Center for Heritage Preservation, the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative, and the Prince Claus Fund, based on a methodology conceived by ICCROM. Together, these organizations have been working to tackle the issue of emergency preparedness and response for heritage, because culture cannot wait.
so hope you enjoyed that video and give you an overview of what FAC entails. It's people centered at the end of the day. And we want to ensure that our cultural heritage will be there for future generations. So some of the guiding principles, this segues into this other slide, of first aid, cultural first aid, is first of all being people-centered. And people-centeredness revolves around prioritizing the needs of people within your communities to enhance their ability to secure and recover their own heritage in times of these crises. So even within certain disasters, heritage institutions have also been seen as or used as refuge for people within their community. And cultural first aid needs to take that into consideration more so than anything else. Yes, we're saving artifacts, buildings, shoring buildings, etc. But at the core of cultural first aid is or will be all people. Secondly, we need to have an inclusive attitude and respect for diversity. It speaks for itself in that we should be people focused, regardless of things such as ethnicity, race, religious persuasion, sexual orientation, and go in with a focus of helping save the culture of a particular society. So as individuals and professionals of cultural heritage, we can sometimes make subjective retorts. So it's a matter of putting that aside and ensuring that you work with people in order to save their heritage. Thirdly, we're looking at the context-specific response. So this involves understanding the wider emergency context, which is crucial to providing cultural first aid. So within your jurisdictions, understanding how the civil society works, how defense works, so your fire, your army, if you have it there, your the DEOs within your or the disaster emergency officers within your various territories, or whatever it's called. Also, from a regional perspective, looking at SEDEMA, for instance, and other organizations that can help within the rescue of culture. And fourthly, looking at interlocking culture with humanitarian assistance. As previously mentioned, at the core of this, we have to look at people. And it should be done in conjunction with humanitarian relief recovery. So, and there have been many ways that cultural first aid and humanitarian response have worked well in conjunction in terms of being used in shelters, cultural games, and things passed down through generations have been used as a source of wellness in our societies. And what we need to overemphasize is the humanitarian aspect and saving of lives being our #1 priority. And we also have to ensure, even post-disaster, that there's continuity within the cultural setting. We've seen what the impact that, for instance, COVID-19 has had on our culture recently, with, say, for instance, the various carnivals and festivals that we usually have on a yearly basis in the region. So I'm just going to go into the types of heritage. So we're looking at the tangible and the intangible heritage. So the tangible heritage would be things such as sculptures, monuments, paintings, architectural works, and buildings, for instance. And the intangible heritage, traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors. So you may be wondering why intangible heritage, how could disasters affect intangible heritage? It could displace people and displace things. For instance, a volcano can effectively decimate an entire community. Same with a hurricane. and cultural norms and practices that would pervade within that society could be lost because people have to be moved. So it's about ensuring and shoring up and ensuring that these communities would be able to actually carry on traditions, even in times of a disaster. So things such as social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge. We saw the impact of the earthquake in Haiti when Haiti suffered that earthquake. It decimated societies, but they also saw it as a practice to come together and still carry out some of their rituals within their societies. So examples of tangible heritage and intangible heritage in the region. So what I have depicted here is a photograph from Maria Nunez of Jab Jab in Trinidad and Tobago. So this is a cultural expression during the carnival season in Trinidad and Tobago, with the whips and so on, and traditional mass is part of the cultural heritage in Trinidad and Tobago. And Trinidad and Tobago was lucky enough to at least have carnival this year, whereas other territories were not. So, I mean, we're still in the throes of the pandemic. So we'll see. And carnival has essentially been cancelled for the next year. And the practicing of our culture, the cracking of the whips, the designs of the costumes is quite impactful. But not having the festivals has also impacted various sectors within our society. For instance, those who provide music, those who vendors, other artisans, it runs the full gamut. So with interruptions in culture, you see it affects lives, it affects livelihoods. Another picture that I have here of tangible heritage is a picture from Devon House in Jamaica. A number of cultural institutions within the world have suffered as a result of, for instance, the pandemic, because you're not having the visitors as you usually do. You're dependent on the patronage of people coming to your places, to your institution to survive. So it's quite stark what we're dealing with right now. And moving ahead, so I'm just giving you an idea of the risk that's inherent to cultural heritage. So hurricanes, something we experience on a yearly basis, and the intensity of the hurricanes have increased exponentially within the last couple of years. Earthquakes, floods, theft, civil disturbances as well, fires, insects, and pests. And environmental factors also play a role in this as well, because the levels of the temperature and humidities within our region, it doesn't usually bode well, especially like in institutions such as archives, and most recently pandemics. So this is a picture of the presidential palace here in Haiti, and it shows you how a disaster within of one full fell swoop, something could just happen and that's the end of it. But with guidance, and the fact, and something that we like to say, in fact, building back better, this could be restored. But I've seen there were efforts trying to rebuild, but I don't know what's happened in the recent years. So what I want to intimate to everyone is their qualities inherent to first aid. You have to be resourceful and understand local knowledge, the local context, especially when you're dealing with communities, because it's not advisable or feasible to just go into communities and just decide that you're just going to impose on them. It should be a collaborative effort. And also you have to have strong analytical and critical skills when dealing with your communities. You have to be people focused. You have to have a love for people when you're dealing with disasters. You have to listen to your community and understand and respect social structures. And it will vary from place to place. And analyze beliefs and values. And be sensitive to human needs. Because at the end of the day, a disaster is a humanitarian disaster. It affects people, it affects lives. And you have to be capable of building that trust as well. And to be part of cultural first aid, you have to also have a can-do attitude. You have to be positive, because if you're not positive enough, it will be reflected when you actually have to go deal with people and deal with your cultural heritage. And you have to be able to think on the fly and move ahead and have stamina as well. So exercising, etc., is also part of it, because you have to be in on the field. So that essentially concludes my presentation at the moment. So we have any questions as well? Sorry.
So thank you so much, Halcyon, for that presentation and overview of FACT and what it means in terms of disaster response, and specifically the idea and concept of the humanitarian impact that disasters have on people, on societies, on communities. I think I want first mainly to take away the idea of this interlocking, integrated. Sorry, I've also got my thing off. There we are. So, so the interlocking and integrated aspect of this approach, where it is not only for the first responders or even for the heritage professionals to respond to to disasters, but very often the individuals on the ground in the communities are the first persons there and have to do what needs to be done. So we need to build that community of practice of persons working together to protect and take care of our cultural heritage. Of course, always mindful that first and foremost is life and limb. But however, if we build capacity within our communities so that they will understand the value of cultural heritage. If we are not there, or the first responders not necessarily, that time has passed, but they are there on the ground, they will also support our work and protect the cultural heritage too. The other aspect I wanted to highlight from what Halson said is some of the risks that she lists there. And I know Samuel is going to go into much more details, but I know for some of us that is a challenge. We don't even realize before that there's that risk and that exists, and so that we could put in things to mitigate them. Sometimes we miss that. So at the time after the fact, we are then now trying to catch up. So it's really important that we know what those risks are, and hopefully as we go through these sessions, more and more that will be identified, and we will try to assist you with that. And even you will share with us instances where you've identified risks in your own peculiar areas. And then finally to say, the issue, and I think we should go away with the sensitivity to human needs. Everything we do, remember, we're not saving culture to hide it away, to keep it for ourselves. The idea of culture and cultural heritage is very, very integral to who and what we are, our identity, our sanity, and our mental well-being. Let's put it that way. So we're saving it as not something out there, extraneous to persons, but as integral to who we are as people in community. So very much so. Thank you so much, Halcyon, for your presentation. I'm going to ask our admin, Ariana, if there are any questions in the chat that we want to deal with right now. Ariana, could you come in and let us know?
Hi, there are currently no questions in a Q&A,
right.
but Shireen's hand is raised, so I'm going to unmute her so that she can ask her question.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Shireen, are you hearing us?
Yes, I'm hearing you now. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I just wanted to follow up quickly on what you said and something else from the presentation. I'm sorry, I'm in transit and I have a small child who won't turn off their device. So I hope it's not disturbing too much, but I'll be quick.
Okay.
One of the things I wanted to point out is the impact on, or at least the mention was the impact on the natural history or natural heritage. For example, we don't currently have a seed bank or tissue bank of endemics or ethnobotany or ethnomedicine type plants. So I was thinking that one of the things that needed to be listed in things that are endangered, whether due to natural or man-made disasters, is the loss of that part of our cultural heritage where we are not able or have not been able to preserve that kind of information.
Yes. Okay, great.
Well, let me say any secure location.
Sorry, we don't hear you so well. Say that one again.
Then say one place. So I wanted us to keep that conversation, or at least aspect of the conversation. I'm saying the biodiversity and natural history aspects of our intangible heritage need to also be highlighted. From the presentation, it was said that one of those, or tissue bank of these.
But I think I get a sense of what she's talking about. And for those who didn't quite hear, Shireen mentioned the impact on natural heritage, the issue of having seed banks, tissue banks to ensure that we could regenerate plants after disasters. I would like to add in there on the issue of our biodiversity
of
intangible heritage. Oh, we're back.
Plants losing volcanic eruptions that we lose because, I don't know, development, etc. So, that's one of the things I wanted to mention that we.
Thank you very much, Shireen. I think we got a lot of the gist of what you have. If when you're at your desk or so and you want to type it into the chat or send me an email, no problem. Thanks so much. In line with that, I want to add the issue of the knowledge from our indigenous people, because a lot of their medicines, their practices, and so when the disasters happen, if a community is wiped out, that knowledge is also gone and lost. So we have to remember, as she highlighted, the issues of biodiversity and the issue of seed banks and preserving those intangible items as well. Thanks so much, Shireen. Any other questions or issues, Ariana, from the chat?
No, there's still no more questions, but if anyone has a question, you can use the raise hand feature or write it in the chat.
In the chat. Right. So if there are currently no additional questions, I think we could move immediately into Samuel's presentation. And thank you all so much again for your interaction in this last session, and of course to Halcyon for her presentation. Samuel, the floor is open to you.
Okay, great.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to share some minutes with you. And I really like to thank the organizers of this webinar for inviting me to participate. And I'm very happy to be back to the Caribbean in a virtual way. As Mrs. Savril has mentioned, I have already been training, and probably some of you are there. I was training in St. Martin a couple of times, and a small workshop we had in Barbados. And since we are part of the Caribbean, Guatemala has a little beach, just a little tiny spot that covers the Caribbean at the south of Belize. So I feel also that we are part of that region, and we share the same problems. So it is very important that we can share some experiences to mitigate the risks. So I'm going to share my presentation. Let's see. Can you see it? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so my presentation today, I'm going to speak a little bit about the different cycles of disaster risk management, and why, especially why it is important to do risk management to cultural heritage. So the idea is that you be prepared. The FAC, or First Aid to Cultural Heritage methodology that Halcyon has mentioned. I was also an alumni. I'm also an alumni of this FAC course. I took it in 2015. And we know how powerful and how enriching this knowledge or this methodology can be. It's a very comprehensive one that we're trying to standardize all over the world. This is happening in all continents. We are more than 100 alumni now from the FAC course that started in 2010. And basically now I think there are two alumni or two ex-FAC members at the Caribbean, and a few in Central and South America, another 4 or 5. So out of 100, I think we are already building up a team of the region. And I think that this is an outcome. What we're doing today, it's an outcome of what we're doing. We're trying to get together this team and try to share our experiences, what has worked, what hasn't worked, how we can apply this methodology in the region. And of course, every region is particularly different. So we have to adjust or tailor-made, some of the methodology to our particular needs, which are totally different from site to site, or especially also from continent to continent. So why risk management for cultural heritage? Cultural heritage has been threatened throughout history. This is not a new subject. According to historical events, we have had all kinds of natural disasters or emergencies, as we should not call them disasters, but emergencies, and also emergencies caused by men, by human mankind, like wars, vandalism, thefts, and so on. So in the last 20 years, I should say, or probably over a decade, tangible and intangible cultural heritage has been more affected than other times, because, for example, during war or armed conflicts, probably cultural heritage was collaterally damaged. It was damaged because a bomb exploded near a site or a museum or so on. But in the last 20 years, we have seen a lot of events that are targeted directly to cultural heritage, so by humans. So that's why all these institutions, ICCROM, especially Smithsonian, Prince Claus Fund, and UNESCO, and all the cultural institutions of the world have focused on training local people, or how to train them, or how to mitigate, or how to reduce the damage of these events, because we have not full control, but we can mitigate, we can reduce the damage. So that's part of this initiative of the FAC. So FAC, it's an acronym for First Aid to Cultural Heritage. So what is a risk? A risk is a chance of something that will have a negative impact on our objectives. Usually it's something bad, something that we are not expecting that will change our objectives. So that is, I mean, generally it's a negative impact. So if we talk about the risks to cultural heritage, we first have to think about the vulnerability of the region. We have to look at the continent, at the world, at the planet, not just to our garden in front of the museum. You know, we have to think about globally. So our area, it's part of the Ring of Fire, you know, which goes from Southeast Asia, Australia, all the way to Chile. And that's why we have a lot of volcanic eruptions in that's the area where volcanoes are mainly. And one of the most of the vulnerable areas are in Southeast Asia and Central America. We are in the top 10 most vulnerable countries of the world. There are 3 of Central America and 7 from Southeast Asia. The Caribbean is in the top 20. So you're safer than us. Guatemala is number 4, where I live. I live in a very vulnerable area. I live in the middle of 3 volcanoes. So we are used to all these things since we are kids. You know, we are taught, you know, culturally taught that we live with this. We have to live with a 72 hours emergency backpack next to our bedrooms or outside the room, just in case we have to evacuate. So another fact that affects our region are the tectonic plates where our land is settled on. So, for example, in Central America or Guatemala, to be more specific, we are in the verge of 3 tectonic plates: the Coco, the Caribbean, and the North American plate. So when those plates are continually moving every day, millimeters. So sometimes they just crash, you know, and sometimes they subdue. So that's when we have different earthquakes. When they crash, we have these up and down movements. And when the tectonic plates subdue, one gets into underneath another one, we have like a rocking boat effect. So those are, you know, that's part of nature. So there's nothing we can do about. That's just where we were born. So those tectonic plates, when they meet or they shake, we have these earthquakes. Guatemala has been destroyed by earthquakes. I mean, the cities have been moved to one valley to another, from one valley to another valley since the colonial days, since the 15th century. There's a lot of evidence where I live, Antigua, Guatemala. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that has been, it's called Antigua, which means old, because the main city used to be here, but it had to be moved to another valley due to these quakes. This is a photo from Haiti that Halcyon already showed you the presidential palace, and you know, a lot of people died. There was that has been one of the biggest earthquakes of this century, you know, the one from Haiti. So due to this ring of fire, we have a lot of volcano eruptions. This is the city where I live. These are pictures from the early 1900s and pictures from 2 years ago. So the same scene we keep on seeing. You know, this is the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the city, and it's only 5 miles away from the volcano. So that's why it has been affected by earthquakes and other natural phenomena. So also, and this might be applied to the Caribbean. You are more exposed to hurricanes. We get the tropical storms usually of the hurricanes, because when they get our land, they become tropical storms. We don't get many hurricanes because, of nature, I guess, because, but we are affected by these tropical storms like Mitch, Stan, Agatha. I mean, there are thousands of names that I can mention of floods. That this is a museum, for example, a community museum before and after. This is the museum, and then you can only see the roof. This was in Costa Rica, and this in Guatemala. So fires are also agents or sources of damage, especially we talk about the fire of the National Museum of the Leas of Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, a couple of years ago, which devastated the whole collection and the building, because this was not just a damage to the collection, but just also to the site, to the building, which used to be the emperor's palace some time ago. So it has a historical context, the building, and 90% of the collection was destroyed. This was caused by, apparently, and to the latest news, that was caused by some electrical short circuit in the air conditioning of the auditorium. So, but of course, this building was not designed for fires or for a museum. So they did not have separation walls in some of the roofs. So that's why they could not control the fire, just went all over the building. And also they had collections of natural collections of animals, so there were a lot of chemicals stored in a storage room, which is a very bad practice. Those are things that we should know, that we don't have nitrate, for example, in a museum or in a film collection. And especially these chemicals to treat the skins and leather and so on are highly flammable. So they didn't help to stop the fire. And fortunately, it was on a Sunday, so there were no visitors. So armed conflicts, vandalism, they began in Afghanistan with the Taliban destroying.
Samuel, sorry, just to check, Shireen mentioned that she isn't able to see the images. So I just want to double check with everyone if they can see the slides right now.
I hope so.
All right, they can see them. Okay, I'll try to talk to Shireen then to troubleshoot it with her.
So are this the images on the screen?
Yes, the majority of people so far can see them. It's just Shireen. So I'll try to troubleshoot it with Shireen. Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So we were talking about armed conflicts and vandalism, another source of damage to our institutions. And that, like I said, began with the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Iraq Museum, Mali, Palmyra recently, and many other stories that we know that cultural heritage was a target. This was already on purpose. This was not a collateral damage. And finally, also, like Halcyon mentioned, another source of damage, which is not in the FAC manual or in any manuals, and this is something we're learning, pandemics. Pandemics, we speak about pests, like termites and mice and so on, but pandemics was something that nobody could have imagined, and this has caused enormous damage to the world, not just to a museum or to an archaeological site. This COVID-19 had a very negative, strong impact, I would say, to heritage, especially intangible cultural heritage. I'm showing some pictures here of the Easter in Guatemala. We celebrate the Holy Week. For us is like, the main attraction of the year. It's a week, it's a spiritual activity, but also family activity and an opportunity for many artisans to sell their crafts. And it's an expression of of our intangible cultural heritage. They make carpets and so on, but everything was closed because this year the Holy Week was 2 weeks after, or 1 week after March 16, which was the date that everything was locked down. So also intangible, not only on intangible, but also on the tangible cultural heritage, there is an impact, because we have had our institutions locked down or closed for 6-7 months now. So that also creates a problem. Termites, pests, mold. If we are not monitoring our collections because the staff cannot attend, or there are limitations for the staff to because of the pandemic, there is a vulnerability for a lot of sites, even in terms of security, because maybe there are usually 5 guards, but due to the pandemic, there might be just 2 shifts. So that gives a lot of vulnerability to the site in terms of security. And also people now are starving, because there has been, especially in Central America, after 7 months of not working, a lot of people is broken, bankrupt, starving. So the social conflicts are beginning to arise, like looting, and a lot of social problems that I don't want to think of, that what may happen if there's a second wave that has been announced for the next weeks, because we could stand 1, economically talking, but 2, I don't know. I mean, that's too much, because here in Guatemala, the measures were very strict, very positive, but it created a great economical problem, because everything was closed for 6 months. So what is this?
Samuel, sorry again. They're asking if you can put it in the full screen mode for these slides.
Sorry.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, so what is risk management? Risk management is everything we do to understand and deal with the possible negative impacts on our objectives. So doing risk management for cultural heritage, going back to the FAC principle and methodology, there's a before, during, and after the emergency situation. So today I will just concentrate on the before part of the cycle, which is about risk reduction and preparedness. We will talk in the following days about what to do, how to respond, how to provide the first aid during event, and the recovery and stabilization after the event. So during the before phase of the cycle, I would say we should concentrate on documentation, risk management, communication, collaboration, and the issues that I will mention in the following presentation. So when we do risk management and assessment of our institutions, we have to think, of course, of the primary hazard, which might be a hurricane, might be an earthquake, might be a volcano eruption, but there are other vulnerability factors which are caused by secondary hazards, like the looting after the pandemic, because the museum was closed or so on, or other hazards that we may think of, but we will discuss that in the following session more in detail about these primary and secondary hazards. But this the idea is that you have to think very, very wide, not just, you have to be very, very open and wide when you do your preparedness plan in order to not to forget anything. So doing risk management involves a whole cycle of activities. This is also based on the ICCROM's methodology. This is not part of the FAC course, but ICCROM has been producing risk publications on risk management for a long time. So this is a publication that I will share with you, the link, so you can all have it. It's available in English in PDF, published by ICCROM, by Pedresoli and Stefan Mikalski, who are also specialists from ICCROM in conservation. So when we do risk management, we have to think about the context, the context of the situation, identify, analyze, evaluate, treat, and monitor. So I will go into every phase of the cycle. So what we mean by understanding the context is that when we are going to prepare our plan, our contingency plan, we have to think about a few aspects. We have to think about, okay, what is our heritage? Okay, what is the context of our heritage? Is it what political environment, beginning on this way, let's say clockwise, the political environment, is it a government institution? Is it a private institution? Is it a university institution? The political environment of the situation, because that makes a difference. Then we also have to think about the actors and stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders who are involved with our heritage, with our archive, with our museum, with our site. And then we have to learn, we have to also know what are the administrative and operational aspects. The organigram or the structure of the operation of the institution, who gives the orders, and what is the whole, what are all the levels of operation of the institution, in order to create a protocol of who does what, like who is going to give the order, who is going to switch off the circuit breakers, who is going to close the water pipes, who has the access to fire extinguishers, or or security equipment, and so many of these. What is also we have to consider what the financial context of our institution is. Are we funded by private donors, or is it the budget from the government, or from a private company, from a university, and so on? Do we have funds for emergency, or we don't have anything? We have to know the reality of our financial context, because that will also define what we can do, or what kind of supplies or protection equipment or technology we can afford to mitigate the risk. The legal aspects, which are also important, how it is constituted. Is it an NGO? Is it private? And then the physical environment. Where are we? Are we next to the beach? Are we on the top of a hill? Are we underground? Are these archives underground, which might be vulnerable to floods? So we have to think about the whole physical environment in order to do our plan. And also the socio-cultural environment, like Halcyon mentioned. It is very important to consult with the community. Depends on the type of the event. Sometimes, as a cultural first aiders, we may arrive to a country, as foreigners sometimes, that we don't know of the socio-cultural environment. We have to respect that. We have to learn in order to respect their cultural issues, and to consult with them whether we can do this, whether we cannot do that, because, like, for example, in Nepal, the earthquake of 2015, a lot of spiritual objects were damaged, and they have their rules. They have their beliefs that have to be respected by all these foreigners that came. That, for example, like using boots in a temple, or shoes. They didn't want in Nepal to use shoes because it's part of the tradition. You have to be barefoot when you go into a temple. But of course, you're in the middle of rubble, broken glass and everything. How can you solve this situation? So that's a little bit about understanding the context of our heritage. So what is it? So you ask yourselves now that I'm briefing this information to you. You may go back to in your minds to your institution and realize, okay, what is it? What context is my heritage in? Out when you analyze all this. So after you have analyzed, after you have identified the context, or you know about the context, you have to identify. You identify 5 points, like what are the risks? What are the risks that my institution has? Then we have here, this manual talks about the 10 agents of deterioration and loss, which are the classic ones, but we can have 20 agents. It depends. Like I said, these are the 10 that we should consider according to conservators. But of course, every institution has different agents, and some more, some less. And then we have to think about the layers of enclosure or the levels of enclosure where our institution. Then the 3 types of risk occurrence, and of course the communicating risks. I will go into each one. So the agents of deterioration and loss, probably we all know. This is something that it's repeated in every workshop. But for those who might be the first time to be exposed to this subject, we have to know that we have these agents, physical forces that refer to earthquakes, dissociation, which refers to when we lose information. Let's say if there is an object that doesn't have a label, or that the label fell, probably we have a very valuable object, but if we don't have information or data, the value is less, it loses its value. Or if there's a person at your institution that knows a lot but doesn't write or doesn't register, if this person lives or dies in an accident or so, then this information is gone forever. So that's what we mean about dissociation, which is very common in a region. That's an agent that can be common. Incorrect relative humidity, especially in the Caribbean. There's a lot of humidity right now. It's raining here. I'm not in the Caribbean, but right now it's 82% of relative humidity in this room. That means, wow, it's terrible for a lot of materials, or especially organic materials. Incorrect temperature also, if it's too hot, too cold. The ultraviolet light, especially for textiles and feathers and all if we expose textile next to a window that it's exposed to the sun, this will fade, or this will, start to deteriorate with time. Pollutants, like if we are in the middle of the streets and we have this smoke coming from trucks and so on, then pests like mice, termites. Water refers to floods, tropical storms. Fire, we talk. Criminals, which is vandalism. So then you have to, when you go back to your institutions, you have to try to practice this exercise. Like, okay, this is my heritage. It is exposed, it is so susceptible, but how much is affected? Like, let's say, if I have a textile being exposed to ultraviolet light on a window, we know that it's susceptible to the ultraviolet light. We know that it's exposed to the UV, but how it has been affected so far? Probably we still have time to correct, to mitigate that damage, or by moving the textile to other place, or by placing a curtain or a filter or so. And then we talk about the levels to assess, or the layers of enclosure that were mentioned initially. When we do risk assessment, and we're going to do an exercise for you, homework for you later in this session. So this will be a very important graphic to consider. Let's say we have 6 layers or 6 levels, you know, as you want to call it, of risks. One is the support of the object. Is it in a safe table? Is it with a proper cover, you know, so people cannot just feel it or touch it? And then the fitting, you know, the fitting, is it safe enough? You know, the case where the object is stored. Then we analyze the room, which is the next level. Is the room okay? Does it have electrical wires, you know, which are kind of dangerous, or is there a leak at the room? Then we analyze also the next layer, which is the building. What are the vulnerabilities of the building? Maybe there are walls or places, broken windows or something where pests can come, or thieves, or, you know, whatever agent of the mentioned before. So you have to really go around the whole building, if it's a 2-3 story building, through every floor, and find out the risk, the vulnerability of each level. Then the site, let's say, like, for example, in San Martin, we know we did this workshop at the government house, which is inside. Outside there's a parking lot, then surroundings by a lot of buildings and so on. So are those any hazard? Do they mean any danger or traffic? Can a fire affect, a next door fire can affect my building, or can a tree? What about if a tree falls down, you know, from the garden or so on? And then, of course, the region. The region, it's a more, it's a wider picture. Like, okay, we have the sea, we have the ocean, for example. You know, the ocean, if there's a hurricane or a tsunami or something, that can be also another agent or other level to consider. So then we talk about the types of risk occurrence. Like, for example, is it a rare event? A rare event is probably once every 100 years, or that's probably an earthquake. You know, an earthquake, they're supposed to be every 50 to 60 years. The strong ones, I mean, destructive ones. So it probably would be placed in a category of rare events. Then we have common events. I would say hurricanes are common events in your area, many times per century. And then cumulative processes, like the aging of items, like also in the Caribbean, because of the salt of the sea, of the ocean, the wind, and the natural elements, probably materials like iron will start to corrode, you know, corrosion. That's a cumulative process. You know, that with time, this iron bar will become rusted, you know. So you have to consider this, because that's important when you do your risk assessment, and it is very important when you take decisions and prioritize. So this is a chart that you will use for the exercise that we're going to give you today. And it's a very simple chart where we have a list of agents. Maybe you can make your own chart and add more agents that are not included in the classic 10 agents. And then you align them with how often these events are. Like, for example, you have the water slot, you may put hurricanes, it's a common event. Earthquake might be a rare event in your area. Criminals, I don't know, it depends on where you are, what institution. Pests also might be a common event. You know, that's something which we live on, with termites, with mice, with all these pollutants and so on. So there are, like I said, more agents that you may add when you do your report or when you do this exercise, because this chart will lead you to plan, to design a better contingency plan. So communicating risks is very important. Communication becomes a very important issue, especially when you're in panic. When you are all worried because the sea is coming, or you're thinking about your family, you're thinking about it is important that you communicate properly in order to really take actions of what is really happening, like identify the danger or agent of deterioration. Let's say, okay, there's a hurricane coming. Specify the expected adverse effect. Something like, okay, if we don't take care about the collection of books that we have in the basement, if we don't move them, if we don't evacuate, we will this collection will be damaged. That will be the adverse effect. Indicate which parts of the heritage assets will most likely be affected. So you have to say, for example, we have to be very fast to move the collection of the basement, otherwise the hurricane is going to damage, or the floods. So that's very important, so people can react, because if you communicate improperly, people will not take it that seriously, let's say, or may take it seriously when there's nothing really big happening. So when you communicate risks, it is always good and useful to have maps. Maps are very important, and also graphic illustrations of the situation. And maps are very important, not only for you to assess risk, but also for the first responders, because we are very used to our museum or our archive building, but when a fireman comes, they don't know. I mean, they just want to put the fire out, and they don't know what your priority is, what is the most important item of your collection, which is also something that you should map, and it will help them to go directly to the point where you want them to be, because they will just come into the building and will start pouring water or any kind of material. Also, you have to know the type of your collection, so you tell also the firemen that not to use certain kind of fire extinguishers on certain materials, that because that may damage. So usually we have the ABC type of fire extinguishers, which apply for some or most of our objects, but not for everything. So then the analyze phase of the wheel, which involves analyzing risks, the ABC scales for risk analysis. This is a very technical issue. I won't go into it, but it's good that, if you want to really be precise, there are methodologies to really go, to the dot. Sources of information, examples of risk analysis, and how sure we are. So when we talk about analyzing, we're talking about the loss of value and how often or how fast. So for example, the loss of value means the example of the textile. If we leave that textile exposed to ultraviolet light, then every day is losing value, because eventually it's going to fade or disintegrate. If this ultraviolet light is every day, that's what we mean how often, because that's to help you to take decisions, to prioritize. The ABC scales for risk analysis, it's a very specific and scientific, I would say, methodology to be precise on how long that object is going to last. I mean, considering that there's not a big earthquake or something like that, but you can really analyze, you can analyze according to the ABC. A refers to how often this happens, how often the object receives ultraviolet light, the loss of value on each affected item, because there's a percentage of value that this object will will have per year, let's say, and that's there are formulas, and in this manual that you will get, you can explore and see how to work this out, because like I said, I'm not going into these details because it's too long and too complicated to understand online just like that. So I would recommend you to go on with the manual. Then the percentage of the value of the collection affected, because for example, in the Brazil National Museum, we know that 90% of the collection was lost. In some cases, maybe just 5%. But those are statistics that you must gather in order to have the magnitude of risk in some cases, and to get more precise about what you should give priority to protect. So sources of information are also very important. There are different types of sources. Of course, the regional statistics through GIS systems, climate tables, the weather reports, all these agencies that report the hurricanes, the National Hurricane Center. Now there's satellites, and every day there's more technology that can help us. But it is important, as it was mentioned before, the local and common knowledge. Elders know. Elders really know. They can tell you, oh, I can remember that 50 years ago, this area was flooded. So, because nature comes back. If a river ran here in front of my house 50 years ago, there are chances that it will happen. We don't know when, but this common knowledge will give us an idea, of this situation, how often, and to analyze the magnitude of the risk and to take decisions. And then finally, scientific and technical knowledge. Now there are a lot of technical and scientific reports by experts who can, if you add all this up, then you will have more chances to mitigate your risks. How sure are we? How sure are we that this hurricane will become 4 or 5 or category 1 in 3 days? We don't know. Nature doesn't ask. It just happens. So, but we have to estimate approximately. So we have okay, this may happen most likely. Low estimate, high estimate. So because that's also important to prioritize when we do our contingency or preparedness plan. Then there's another technical issue that you can quantify the uncertainty, if you want to be more precise. So that goes with the parameters that were mentioned before. And again, you can consult the manuals because this is also a tricky, dedicated exercise. So evaluate the magnitude of risk and level of priority. Compare the risks also. That's very important. When we talk about comparing risks, we're talking about, let's say, the first risk here might be fire building. In this particular case, this source is the highest one, the fire build. Then water, then damage the ceilings, the ventilation, and you have rain, floods, and so on. So according to this chart, there are some hazards or agents that are not too dangerous. Probably we should concentrate more on these, when we prioritize or prepare more for these risks that are high on the chart according to the occurrence, the magnitude, and so on, according to the parameters. So also it is good to do a risk mapping, because that will help you to look at the picture. This is a map we just did on Antigua, where I live, the risk map. The risk mapping goes, what are the chances or probabilities, and what will be the consequences? So green is safe, orange is kind of warning, like a traffic light, and then red, of course, is problem. And you have these different scales, On this side, you have the consequences may be negligible, minor, moderate, significant, and severe. And the probabilities are rare, unlikely, moderate, likely, and almost certain. So in this case of Antigua, the almost certain and most severe agent is traffic, tourism, lack of urban planning. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but there's no planning as the city develops because of tourism, and real estate and traffic, so that is creating a lot of damage to impact and damage to the structures of the 15th century. They may not were destroyed by earthquakes, but big trucks, traffic, people are destroying them slowly, but they are. Earthquakes are still on the red label, but moderate, not as bad as traffic, because traffic and tourism is every day. Earthquakes are not every day, but still they can be powerful. Dissociation, it's severe, but it's very rare. I mean, and I included dissociation here because we have a lot of historic archives in Antigua, Guatemala. I mean, we have archives from the colonial days that are here. So if there's dissociation with those archives, a lot of information will be gone forever, because that's our history. And then, of course, we go a little low in a lower level. Thefts are likely, but moderate. Temperature, fires, not so many, and so on. So also, it is important that when you place your site or your institution, you use coordinates. Here we have the altitude and the coordinates, because remember that the army or first responders, militaries, which are usually the ones who attend first, they go by coordinates. There's a pilot flying a helicopter. Probably the pilot came from United States or from Guatemala, from another country to help, but they don't know. They don't know where to land or where to help. But if you give them the coordinates, that's the language they speak. So it is important to map your institution with coordinates. Then the treating risks, the layers of enclosure, the stages of control, combining these layers and stages, selecting the best options, planning and implementing. So the 5 stages of control are very important: avoid, block, detect, respond, and recover. Those are the classic 5 stages of control. When we do our risk assessment, this is before the emergency. So when we combine the levels, we can also prioritize. We combine avoid, block, detect, respond of the 6 layers. Okay, what do I see? What do I have in the region, like outside the building? Okay, there might be a sea, there might be garbage, there might be pests. So we have to avoid or block some of these hazards. And then we do it for every level, like we combine the sites, the building, the collection, the fittings. So that will give us a very, very accurate and precise map of what to do in each different area and what we should do first. Like, for example, we're talking about avoid placing new heritage assets in areas that are affected by tsunamis or floods. Avoid risky practices such as having candles inside the museum or institution. Avoid food in your institution so you don't get pests. Avoid losing information, data on hard disks, or digital of information on inventories and so on. And the selfie sticks, which are usually banned in museums because they can damage. Block entrance, block rain, block agents of deterioration coming into your building, block light, ultraviolet light with curtains, and block danger by putting objects in cases. detect. You can detect smoke or fire with the smoke detectors. With cameras, you can detect if somebody is stealing or something is going right. Digital tools like to measure the relative humidity, the temperature, the ultraviolet light, and so on. So also detect how fixtures, how objects are attached to a wall, just in case of an earthquake. Respond. You rescue archival records from a flooded historic city where documents must be dried quickly to prevent mold growth. And respond with firemen will respond with extinguishers to a fire, remove sculptures from a building at risk, and so on. And recover, reconstruct a monument destroyed by vandalism, work with police to recover stubborn rare blocks, restore museum objects after accidental breakage, recover digital data about heritage from a disk. Then we have the selecting the best options, which that refers to how are we going to respond to these needs? Like, should I buy a security camera system? Should I buy a sprinkler system for the fires? Should I buy cameras for thefts? And of course you have to quote. And if I do invest in this, hire a pest control company, the risk reduction will be 90%, and it will only cost me 500 per year, the service. Or replace open shelves by bookcases and sealed doors, also will help in a percentage, and so on. So these are exercises that you can do, and order the administrators of the institution can do before budgeting. And finally, monitoring, it's always important. Monitoring and review. Once you have blocked or avoided, or you have protected your assets, you also have to monitor. If you have moved an object from another because of relative humidity, you have to keep on monitoring every week or as much as possible how is the behavior. There are tools that can measure this every day, but of course this will depend on the resources of the institution. Most of institutions, we know we don't have the resources to have all this sophisticated equipment, but at least the basics, so that's very important. So with that, I would like to thank you. And this is the guide to risk management of cultural heritage, which you can download from www.icrom.org. Yeah, and that's what we'll talk later. So if there are questions, please.
Okay. Thank you so very much, Samuel, for that very informative presentation. I've been seeing people in the chat saying, of course, it's very interesting. They're learning much. We had a few people who had to leave, and we thank them for sharing with us. In terms of questions, I'll ask Ariana to point me to them in a moment, but just a quick review, some of the main points. I think the idea of the overview of risk, clearly we know as a region in the Caribbean, we are literally sitting on all sorts of risks here externally, in the region itself. But I think the point you made about the pandemic as a new, well, relatively new, let's say that, reoccurring risk. And certainly I think, I know for sure in Trinidad and Tobago, at our libraries and in our archives, we did face that issue of after being locked down for a certain time, we had to come back where there was only limited monitoring, where the mold may have come up, issues of pests, because there was not the ongoing management of that, and the risk of security in some of the sites. And so clearly these are other risks which we now have to consider based on this new environment that we're looking at. Right. Something again that we want to highlight, and we've coming from Hassan's presentation and continuing in yours, the idea of respect for the culture of the place, even in the face of disasters and having to respond and having to deal with it. And in making sure we do engage with the local community, respect their knowledge, and of course ask for it. And because they would certainly have a lot of information to share with us. I was interested by the comment about this dissociation. I didn't even think about that as a risk, but yes, clearly things which are not labeled may have lost their label, or simply because those who may have the institutional memory about it no longer there, you may lose the value of the item just by having that issue. The assessment of risk and the levels coming down from region all the way down to the individual item, I think is very useful for us in our profession, when we have to approach our funders and our heads and our leaders for funding to manage these risks. As you say, we can by identifying the risks, we can then be able to prioritize and say how much in terms of levels this will affect us, and then we can channel our funds, very meager as they are, in the most critical areas. One of the last things I really liked was the idea of graphics and maps being available, so that especially for our first responders, when they arrive on our site, and I'm just giving an example, it's happened at our archives, we had a fire. They didn't actually have a fire, God forbid, but the alarm went off. And the fire people arrived because it was automatic, and they came. And when they arrived, as far as persons were concerned, they came with their axe to break down the door and get in. And people are saying, okay, so where are the keys, and where's this, and where's that? And you're going into a state when you're faced with the situation. Things need to be there before, in place and clear, and where anybody can see immediately on arrival, okay, this is where whatever it is. And the graphics are really useful. They actually pointed out, I was embarrassed to say, they showed me where because we did have an actual map. And so they would say, okay, this is where we have to go to do this and that. So I didn't have to break down doors and so on. But I felt that was very useful. We need to make sure and have things easily found. And again, as you rightly say, all of this has to be done before. We need to have those things in place before. And lastly, risk assessment. Well, that was my last statement, and I guess it's overall. Risk assessment is very helpful for decision making, assigning priorities, and even in managing risk. And as I said, helping us manage our very limited funds. So that's just my little take on it. And Ariane, anything in the chat, comments, questions from our members? Oh, one more thing I just wanted to say. The session is recorded. The material, everybody who's registered, we have your emails. We will share the links to, as Samuel mentioned, that we have the manual, as well as the presentations will be made available to persons. And going forward, we hope that in the next sessions, because we do have 4 more sessions that go as part of this full program, we hope that the persons, well, I would, let's say, committed to doing the full 5 sessions, we will provide again, following this, in your emails, the registration for continuing with these sessions, in which it will be definitely, there will be interaction, there will be exercises, and at the end of the day, you will leave the whole program with tools and items which you can use and identify stuff and use and set up within your institution, and if you're representing your country, whatever it is. So you will leave with a useful set of tools coming out of the activity. So although Samuel gave you here a very kind of high level overview, a lot of the forms and a lot of the documents you see there, of course you will have that, and you will get to actually plug in your information and make it useful and in line with what you need to do. So that is hopefully in terms of the next steps. So Ariana, go on to you. Questions and comments.
Hi, there's one question from Elvira before Samuel's presentation. She asked, what are the experiences in terms of humanitarian linkages with the Red Cross organizations of the region and in specific countries?
Okay. Either Samuel or Halston, do you have any specific experiences that you could speak to as it relates to Red Cross and responding to disasters, heritage, cultural heritage
Well,
issues?
I'm sorry, go.
Okay. I haven't heard of any interactions with the Red Cross and dealing with cultural heritage sites in that regard. But that's something going forward that we're trying to establish. What we need to do as a collective is to engage groups such as the Red Cross, Blue Shield, UNESCO, etc., especially as we want to set up this framework within the region. So that's something that we're going to be looking at. I don't know if you had any interactions on your end, Samuel.
Yes, Samuel? Oh, Ariane, if you could unmute Samuel.
Yeah, I've unmuted him.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I would say, especially in Guatemala, well, first I would say that humanitarian is always the priority. We are cultural first aiders, but we are very clear. We have very clear that in case of emergency, we have to prioritize the human lives. There's no doubt about it, and that's it. So, but once the humanitarian aspect has been taken care of, and that's when civil protection comes in. And in the case of the Caribbean, for example, you have SEDEMA network, which has the civil protection agencies in the region, which involve the Red Cross, the Army, the police, military, all these first responders, firemen, who are present whenever there's an emergency. In Central America, due to our vulnerability, I am very proud to say that we are highly organized with those issues. There is an equivalent of SEDEMA called CEPREDENAC, which involves all the Central American and Dominican Republic also agencies for civil protection, and they have a lot of training, a lot of simulation, practical and meetings, and all kinds of capacity building in the region, and very good teams. I have lived personally, volcano eruptions, earthquakes, floods, and they are always there. And I should say that it is very well organized and coordinated. So, but that's why it is important now, after the UNESCO SEDEMA conference that took place in Barbados in March, we were trying with UNESCO, we have been trying to merge, to sensitize these two sectors, the culture sector and the civil protection sector, because we have to work together. We have to, without the civil protection agencies, we cannot perform. I mean, for access, infrastructure, logistics, permits, but the civil protection agencies have all these. What they do not have is the knowledge or how to handle cultural heritage. So that's the challenge, to share, to exchange knowledge. We can teach first responders, civil protection, we can sensitize them and teach how to handle cultural heritage, and they will absorb it really fast, because they are already into a lot of these issues that we are mentioning. They just have to incorporate this element, and vice versa. Also, we can learn from them. They have capacity building infrastructures that we can participate in courses, simulations aimed to humanitarian aid, but also which also a cultural first responder should have at least the basics, or more if you can, depending on your tasks. But this is a win-win operation. And like Halston said, Blue Shield, it's an organization that it's like the Red Cross of the culture. I'm a member of Blue Shield International and the chair of Blue Shield Guatemala. And we work together with civil protection, we train and so on. And but it is a way to be together. Blue Shield involves the 4 pillars of culture, which are ICA, International Council of Archives, ICOM, which is the International Council of Museums, IFLA, which is the International Federation of Libraries, and ICOMOS, which is the Monuments and Sites International. So if you want to organize Blue Shield in your country, you should have members from each of these institutions in order to, that's a standard. That's in the board of this Blue Shield committee, national committees that you can have. You must have, I think, one of each sector, because probably this month we have a problem in an archive, next month in an archaeological site, and so on. So that's why it's important to have a team, because this is a work of a team. This is not a work of an individual. We all have limitations, and that's why it is very important to start creating these kind of bodies, not necessarily to have Blue Shield Trinidad Tobago, but maybe through CHEN, the Caribbean Heritage and Legacy Network, we have been considering this, how to establish or how to connect Blue Shield to the region. And we can use a similar model used in Pacific Islands, where there are small islands like Samoa, Vanuatu, all these vulnerable little islands that have merged together to establish a Blue Shield Pacific. So it could be a Blue Shield Caribbean, which because a small island, it is very hard, because it requires funding. Blue Shield doesn't give any funding. You have to generate your own funds. So the more united we are, it will be easier to have an office, an accountant, because even if you don't have money, once you register as an NGO, as Blue Shield NGO, then you have expenses, even if you don't do any financial operation, you still have to declare the taxes or whatever movement that involves a freelance accountant. Maybe we can use our institution as an office, but internet and so on. So this is an answer to reflect, for you to reflect of how we can all work together to try to establish these bodies that will bring us together and will make us stronger.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I'm actually spotting some of the questions in the chat there. So I'm preempting you a little bit, Ariana. I'm seeing the question about SEDEMA. SEDEMA is a CARICOM agency representing many states. Have there been any links with them? They handle logistics, personnel, etc. Most countries have a national disaster office. We can start by meeting with the directors. I believe this is from, oh gosh, I can't see your whole name, but that's a question. And I want to say yes to all that is being said there. Actually, SEDEMA has been invited along with UNESCO to be part of the full session that will happen in the 5 sessions that as we continue, and they will speak to how we can make those collaborations. They're going to share with us the structures they already have in place. We've begun the discussion with them about where can cultural heritage fit in their regional, in their plan. As you said, the infrastructure is already set up. We're not inventing anything, but we are saying here we can be inserted into this level or that level. And as Samuel mentioned, not only what can they do for us when it comes within times of disaster, but also what can we as heritage professionals contribute to recovery and disaster mitigation or management, because we do have a peculiar set of skills in terms of conservation. We have very strong structures in a lot of cases, often, not always, we have structures built to protect. And so that we could have the issues of being shelters. There's also the idea that a lot of us, we provide access in web Wi-Fi access, communications access. It's norm for us. And after an incident or event, that is usually something very difficult getting communication up and running and so on. And I know that in recent history, one of our libraries in one of our islands, that became the focal point of everyone coming to be able to reach out to people because they got their Wi-Fi back up first. And so that then everybody was coming to them to try and make connections with persons, whether in the island or off. So we can contribute, and as well as we want to be at the table and in the discussion, and as Samuel has highlighted and Halcyon, now, before, right? And make sure that we are part of the structure and contribute to that. So definitely they will be on in the discussion, and we can all talk about how it can happen and integrate. But we have already started that discussion with those stakeholders. And as you will see, as the fact training goes on, that is critical to what they talk about, the issue of engaging your stakeholders from in front and ensuring that you've already built those relationships, maintain them, and, well, as Samuel says, support each other. Any other questions that you're seeing, Ariana?
Yeah, Evelyn has her hand raised, so I'm going to unmute her now.
Mm-hmm. Is she on?
Evelyn?
Hello? Evelyn?
Evelyn, there should be a feature on your screen to unmute the call now.
Yeah.
Unmute. Are you hearing me now? Okay.
Oh, yes, yes. Loud and clear. Good afternoon.
Okay, beautiful. Yes, I'm Evelyn Thompson from the Jamaica National Heritage Trust Conservator. While we do not have a direct collaboration with our Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, we work fairly closely with the Jamaica Defense Force. We've had established a relationship with them over the years, from the JDF Coast Guard through to the general JDF body. And without taking tales out of schools, we are actually on the table now discussing a more detailed collaboration, which will include training of the JDF personnel so selected in the sensitization to the protection of cultural heritage, which will include in the event of disasters, because they themselves are involved in the disaster management process. So that, and the training will not only be locally in terms of Jamaica, but it will be regional training. So we see that coming forth as a fairly structured plan in order to ensure that on a regional basis, i.e. within the Caribbean, we will have people who have expertise in disaster preparedness and emergency management, and that will complement the work that we do in our cultural heritage institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think these activities that this one and others that have been organized, one of the main issue about that is because we all have very limited resources, we need to know what other people are doing as well, so that we can all we can make best use of those limited resources. So if we know that something is going on in another region, another area, you reach, some may be further ahead than others, some may have more advantages, some more disadvantages. And so that together we can continue to support each other. It's always, so often we end up working in silos, and it's to our disadvantage. But once we share and find ways to collaborate, it was always going to be better. And thanks for sharing that information with us. And of course, we will keep in touch to see what else can be done. Anyone else? Ariana?
No, there are currently no more questions.
Okay. And it is now 3:14. We've done very well. Okay, so at this point, I just want to give a quick overview, just kind of saying what the upcoming sessions will likely look like. As both Halcyon and Samuel have said, this the fact looks at the before, the during, and the after. And we started by looking at some of the before today, fairly quickly, and not with doing the actual exercises, but introducing. And going forward, I expect that we will continue with we will probably start off with some of those exercises to reinforce what was done in the next session. And we're going to do an overview of evacuation, mitigation, and preparedness, along with community impact, and how heritage institutions can be of help to the vulnerable. So that's day 2. Day 3, and most likely day 4, based on how much can be done, we're seeing that there will be this situation analysis. As you saw from Samuel's presentation, it's quite detailed. And if we want you to actually go away with something, it's expected that we're going to let you do the exercises, right? Whether on site as part of the webinars or as a homework, an off-site exercise, so that you come away with the material. So they will also, out of there, the 3 steps in the first aid would be, in terms of the response, situation analysis, assessment, and then security and stabilization. And the last part will be building your disaster management network. And as I mentioned before, the idea of the collaborations, whether it be CHEN in the Caribbean Heritage Emergency Network that we are working with, SEDEMA, UNESCO, and as our colleague just mentioned there, internally your local collaborations, whatever those are, we're going to talk about that and how we can build them and strengthen them. And then the preservation of heritage material in times of crisis. Again, an area of response, but really response and preparedness in a way, because we'll look at some tools that you can go away with to make sure that you can deal with something when it does happen, that at minimum that you can have on hand to begin your response. So that's just a quick idea of what will come. As I said, at the end of this, we have everyone's email. You will get a detailed email outlining the steps forward, and we will ask, I know we did a registration for this one, but going forward for the next 4 sessions, we want to make sure we know our numbers in terms of the classes, so we can best organize the sessions going forward and the activities for your benefit, so that you come out with something useful at the end of the session. Right, so that's my that's my little overview, and do please look out for our email, the group email, which will most likely see our heading, the Kavita heading, saying where the details of the sessions and of course the material that was provided during this session will also be shared with you. Ariana, oh sorry, I'm seeing Samuel has a comment. Yes, Samuel?
Yes, just before, I understand we're closing now. So I just like to address a little exercise for you to do, before we say goodbye.
Okay, yes.
Okay, so we have talked about risk assessment pre-event this morning, and a preparedness plan. Every institution should have a preparedness plan. I mean, a plan of emergency, or as you may call it. And in this session, we have given you the tips of how to best prepare this plan. So in order to get you going and to get into real life, because we know these courses can be a lot of blah, 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 and a lot of nice pictures, but we, especially now online, it is a challenge, because most of these workshops involve presential activities, practical exercises, which is the problem now due to the pandemic, that we cannot be presentially. And that's why a lot of theory has to be addressed, or we have to be very creative to keep you connected, for online. So I think since next session will be, I think, until Wednesday, you will have enough time to conduct some kind of practical exercise at your own institution. Like, for example, I would invite you to conduct a risk assessment of your institution, with all the elements that we have spoken today, from all the different spaces that you have, and that will be useful for you. I mean, this is an exercise, but it's a real one. So the outcome will give you, a real situation picture. So we will send you through email. I understand the template, the form that will help you to conduct this exercise based on the agents of deterioration, like the 10 or different agents or more, the sources of risk for your institution, and then of course based on the occurrence of those events, like how often and so on. So that will place you in an interesting situation. I'm sure many of those, maybe some have already done it or they know, but I'm sure a lot of you, we go to our office every day, and we get so used to what we see that we don't even notice that there's a leak or there's a short, a barbed wire that it's going to create an electrical problem. Or so on. So this will be good to conduct. I see that we are about 60 participants today. That's what I have recorded. So maybe you will, if there are participants from the same island, you may get to, you may just propose one institution, or I don't know. You can do your exercises, and then you send them to our moderator, and we will sort a few of them, because of course, due to time limitation, we cannot report whatever everyone does. We cannot do 60 reports, but we will try to do the most significant ones, or the most common ones, to according to the criteria of common events to every institution. And but the good thing is just to conduct the exercise, and then you will be more comfortable and familiar to move on, and you'll be more motivated. So so I just should say that the form will be sent by email, and I hope everything is clear. If somebody has not clear what I've said, please write it now so I can answer. Otherwise, I assume that everybody has a clear instructions of what we should do during our weekend. Sorry to give you work for the weekend, but
Okay, thank you, Samuel. It's not work, it's building our preparedness, so it's good. So
Okay.
just to reiterate.
If I may, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, if individuals don't actually belong to a formal institution, you can look at your community. For instance, if in your church, for instance, if you're able to. We're not asking you to go out there if you have lockdown protocols in place and so on in your territories to actually go out and do this. So it could be in any church or organizations if you belong to a dance troupe or anything like that. So to see how that institution functions. For instance, if you don't belong to a formal institution. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of the analysis.
Okay, so then just to reiterate, then you are being asked to conduct your risk assessment in your area, in your community, in your institution, whatever is available to you. The outcomes, it will be for your benefit. It will be a real situation that you can then use as we go through the course. All of this information will build on each other. So having done the risk, then you will look at how you can mitigate and prepare and etc. And so we will send the forms and a little, guide to say, well, what the exercise is, God willing, by the end of the day, or at least by the latest tomorrow. And what would be great is if the next session is due to be the 3rd of November. If you respond by, if you get responses by the 2nd, which is the day before, then as Samuel said, because of the size of the group, we could probably then compile and collate some responses that to lead the discussion into the next session. Right? So, but of course, we're not telling you no if you don't send it on that day, but it will be useful if we get it before. That will help lead the discussion off into session 2. Any other questions or comments, Ariana or our presenters? Okay, so we're going to get an early end today. It's like children ending school early. But I would like to thank everyone for your attendance and your attention. And we were very pleased by the with the response. And I guess that reiterates for us how important this topic is and how concerned we all are about it. I'm not going to belabor it, but I think it's a first step. Um, and I'm sure as mentioned by one of our colleagues, all of us have taken our own individual little steps in our areas, in our countries, and so on. And we can now learn from each other as we go forward. And I think that is the essence of this interaction, is to build that network and to support each other as persons in the Caribbean region so we can protect our cultural heritage. And with that, I'd like to say thank you all so very much. I think you have the email so that you can reach out to us, whatever questions, comments, anything else. We look forward to your feedback and we look forward to seeing you in the rest of the sessions. Thank you all so much.